Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this training webinar for BIN number 25-029, which is about Assembly Bill 2473, Alcohol or Other Drug Counselor Educational Requirements. My name is Millie Patel, and I'm with Aurora Health Group. Today, we're helping DHCS facilitate this webinar. Today's presenters from the DHCS Licensing and Certification Division are Crystal Sanchez, who is the branch chief of the division, Monique Garcia, who is the section chief of the Counselor and Medication-Assisted Treatment section at the division, and Stephen Lamb, who is a health program specialist at the division. We are also joined by speakers Laura B. Fandino and Jessica Bradford from the University of California, San Diego. Laura B. Fandino is the Chief Academic Officer and Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs at the UCSD Division of Extended Studies, and Jessica Bradford is a Program Manager for UCSD Healthcare Education. Next slide, please. Today's meeting will be recorded, and DHCS will make the recording and slides available at a later date. DHCS is also working on an FAQ that will be uploaded. There will be a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A box on your control panel. I will now pass it over to our first speaker, Crystal.
Thank you, Millie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So if we can go to the next slide, thank you. So I just wanted to give you some background here. Behavioral Health Information Notice number 25-029, that BIN sets forth AB 2473 education requirements for registered and certified counselors. DHCS, we published this BIN in July 2025 with an effective date of January 1st, 2026. And the reason why we did this was to allow time for the certifying organizations to update their applications, their procedures, communicate requirements to all of you, and for DHCS to also provide TA to the SUD workforce, which is why we're all here today. A key goal of AB 2473 is to ensure a consistent foundation of training for both registered and certified counselors, starting with a baseline with a minimum of 80 hours of education and completing courses that cover 12 key core competency education topics, which are listed on the screen here. We wanted to point out that it is okay and acceptable for a counselor to complete the 80 hours and core competency education prior to even applying for initial certification. We did also want to note, due to some questions that have come in, is that counselors must check in with their chosen certifying organization to determine how many hours equates to transcript units for students who are completing courses through colleges that issue transcripts as proof of meeting these new education standards. Next slide. So since renewal requirements are different during the first year, this behavioral health information notice defines a first-year registered counselor, which is a counselor who has been registered for less than a year. And the BIN also defines a registered counselor, who is a counselor that has already renewed their registration at least one time. So the reason why we made these distinctions was because we wanted to provide transparency regarding first-year registered counselor and registered counselor education requirements. Next slide. So first, I want to highlight that the 80 hours and the core competency education topics, those are two distinct educational requirements. However, to make it easier and more feasible for first-year registered counselors to complete these new education standards, educational providers, they do have the option to update their curriculum to make the core competencies equate to 80 hours. Also, several individuals have asked, do the peer support courses, do those courses count towards the 80 hours of the core competency education topics? And the answer is no. So if you want to find out which courses qualify under these new education standards, you'll want to contact your certifying organization. And also the certifying organizations, they will publish on each of their websites which educational providers and courses are approved to meet the 80 hours of education, including education around the core competency topics. So now I'd like to dive into the information on the slide. Individuals who register as a counselor for the first time on or after July 1st, 2025, they must complete a minimum of 80 hours of education and core competency education topics within 6 months of registration. And that's effective January 1st, 2026, because that's the effective date of our guidance. So what this means is that counselors that register between July 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2025, those individuals actually have all the way until July 1st, 2026 to complete these new education requirements. And then counselors that register on or after January 1st, 2026, so the date that the behavioral health information notice becomes effective, those individuals will be required to complete these new education requirements within 6 months of their initial registration date. And then we have counselors who, are already existing and who have been registered before July 1st, 2025. Those individuals are exempt from completing the 80 hours of education because that exemption is specified in statute, but they must complete courses that cover the core competency education topics prior to applying for initial certification. So what that means is counselors who registered prior to July 1st, 2025, those individuals, they have to complete 315 hours of AOD education, including core competency education topics prior to initial certification. So it didn't increase the amount of hours that you're needing to complete for initial certification. That still stays the same because that is what's currently required from the certifying organizations for initial certification. And then I did want to share that the certifying organizations, they did report that counselors that are currently completing coursework towards initial certification, they've already completed many of the core competency education topics. As these core competencies, they're already covered in existing curriculum with the exception of maybe one or two core competencies, such as utilization of health records. So remember that any courses that counselors are seeking to complete these new education standards, those courses have to be accepted and approved by the counselor's chosen certifying organization in order to successfully renew the credential. And also, they will receive credit for completion of any of the core competency education courses towards initial certification because that's what's specified in the statute. Next slide. So I did want to take some time to cover some of the statutory exemptions that we have outlined in Health and Safety Code 11833. So individuals who register as a counselor and have a master's degree in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, or counseling are exempt and do not need to complete courses that cover the core competency education topics. But those individuals are still required to complete the 80 hours of education within 6 months of their initial registration date. And then we have another exemption, which are individuals who registered before July 1st, 2025. Those individuals are exempt from the 80-hour requirement, but these individuals still have to complete courses that cover the core competency education topics prior to initial certification, as we discussed on that prior slide. Additionally, AB 1860, so that's a separate bill that was passed during the same legislative season. That bill specified folks that are completely exempt from registration and certification requirements altogether. So those individuals are also exempt from completing these new education standards that we're talking about today. What this means is that the following individuals that are listed on the slide, they may provide counseling services without obtaining a registration or certification credential from a certifying organization. And that includes a graduate student that is affiliated with university programs listed on the screen, associates registered with the Board of Behavioral Sciences, and licensed professionals as defined in California Code of Regulations, Chapter 8, and that specific section is 13015. And then we define in regulations a licensed professional, so these are licensed professionals that are exempt from providing or that can provide counseling services but are exempt from obtaining a registration or certification credential. So that would be a physician licensed with the Medical Board of California, a psychologist licensed with the Board of Psychology, a clinical social worker, or a marriage and family therapist licensed by the California Board of Behavioral Sciences, um, or an intern registered with the California Board of Psychology or the California Board of Behavioral Sciences. And then I wanted to clarify that we didn't add these individuals to the AB 2473 bin. And the reason why is because these exemptions are outside of the scope of AB 2473. So if you are one of those individuals that are completely exempt from registration or certification requirements altogether, you can reference Behavioral Health Information 23-008 for more information. And we do have that bin hyperlinked on the slide, and we will be sharing these slides as well after the webinar so that we have access to all the resources. Next slide. Okay, so I want to jump into some timeframes. AB 2473. This bin now introduces timeframe requirements for registrants. Therefore, DHCS also implemented timeframes for AOD counselors to submit documentation to their certifying organizations. And then we did also implement timeframes for the certifying organizations to review and return application deficiencies to the counselor. And we did that so that way it reduces the risk of, counselors having their registration lapse. And it also gives time for counselors to make up any missing education that was identified by the certifying organization. So first year registered counselors, they must provide proof of completing the minimum of the 80 hours of education and the core competency education topics to their certifying organization for review within the first 6 months of registration. So this really is essentially just like a check-in, and a full application is not required at month 6. Then the certifying organization, they'll review the education that was submitted by the first year registered counselor, and they'll do that within 45 calendar days, and they'll have to notify the counselor if the education is complete or incomplete. So if the certifying organization determines that the first year registered counselor did not meet all education requirements, then the first year registered counselor must complete the missing education before the registration expires. And what they'll do is they will identify what exactly is missing, just so that way the counselor is well aware of what they need to complete in order to renew their credential. Failure to submit all education requirements and receive approval from the certifying organization, it does put the counselor's credential at risk of expiration, and as a result, the counselor will no longer be able to provide counseling services until they successfully renew their registration. The first year registered counselor's credential is valid for 1 year, and it will not be suspended or revoked for missing or incomplete education. So you really do have more than just 6 months to complete the education. We really built in this check-in time frame so that way you can work with your certifying organizations and really determine if you're meeting the requirements before you need to submit your full application. And we did receive a lot of questions around this. So just to further clarify, first year registered counselors, they may continue to provide counseling services during the renewal application review process, so long as they maintain a valid credential. Next slide. Thank you. So first year registered counselors, they must submit an application for registration renewal a minimum of 120 calendar days or 4 months before the expiration date of their current credential. The 120-day timeframe is not for the certifying organizations. The first year registered counselor is required to submit the application 120 days prior to the expiration date of their current credentials, so they have time to complete any missing education if applicable. Certifying organizations must they actually have to confirm receipt of the application within 7 days, and then they have to send written notice and complete their review to the first year registered counselor and advise the counselor whether their application is approved, denied, or incomplete. So if the application is approved, the notice will include the first year registered counselor's full legal name, the registration number, the registration issuance date, and then the registration expiration date. And then if the application is incomplete, the notice must specify the missing information, so that way the counselor can complete any missing education and successfully renew their credential. And then if the application is denied, the notice must specify the reasons for denial and the applicant's right to appeal the denial of their application. Next slide. So first-year registered counselors, they then have 30 calendar days from the certifying organization's written notice to provide missing information and or education documentation. The certifying organization must provide written notice to the counselor, whether approved, denied, or remains incomplete, within 21 calendar days upon receipt of any missing information that was submitted by the first-year registered counselor. And then the certifying organization, they may terminate review of the application if the counselor fails to respond within the given time frame of 30 calendar days. However, after speaking with the certifying organizations, they are very committed to working diligently with the counselors to get counselors' applications approved rather than just simply denying the application. And then again, if the application is denied or terminated, the first-year registered counselor will be notified of their appeal rights, and they may also submit a new application as well. So that does cover my slides. I did want to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Monique, and she will be covering annual education requirements for counselors, which is also new in our state guidance.
Thank you, Crystal. So I will start with the annual renewal requirements for registered counselors. Again, a registered counselor is an individual who has been registered to provide AOD counseling services for 1 year or more and has renewed their their registration at least once. Registered counselors who have completed fewer than 315 hours of AOD education must complete 50 hours of AOD education annually for renewal. The education must be approved by the registered counselor certifying organization, and documentation of completion must be submitted to the counselor certifying organization in order to qualify for registration renewal. The AOD education must include any topics in CCR Title IX, Section 13040A1 through 5, and core competency topics outlined in the Behavioral Health Information Notice. The certifying organizations have the responsibility and the authority to approve and vet education that they will accept for registration and certification. Annual education requirements for registered counselors was added to this BHIN as BHIN 25010, which is the BHIN for peers, specifies peers must complete 20 hours of continuing education every 2 years. I also wanted to touch on how we came to the 50-hour requirement. So currently, certifying organizations require 40 hours of education annually. In the draft regulations package, we removed the 5-year limitation for registered counselors to become certified. So the annual education requirement was updated to 50 hours. 315 hours, which are the hours required for initial certification, divided by the 50-hour annual requirement comes out to 6.3 years to complete. So if a registered counselor completes the bare minimum of 50 hours of education per year, they will become certified in less than 6.5 years. And then just a reminder, our BHIN authority is limited to AB 2473. So the 5-year limitation remains intact until regulations are promulgated. However, once regulations are promulgated, this will allow registered counselors to enter and leave the SUD counseling field as needed for various reasons. And examples could be a career change, military duties. They may choose to be a stay-at-home parent for a period of time, medical conditions, or they may simply want a break. Registered counselors who have completed the 315 hours of AOD education for initial certification only have to submit 20 hours of continuing education to qualify for registration renewal. We set their annual education the same as certified counselors because these counselors are simply completing outstanding work experience hours required for initial certification, or they just need to take the exam. Next slide. And like first-time registrants who have been registered and providing counseling services for more than 1 year have time frame requirements to ensure The certifying organizations have time to review and return deficiencies to the counselor to remedy before their registration lapses. And Crystal covered the timeframes already. They are the same as slide 6, so I'm not going to go in depth on these timeframes again, but just wanted to include for awareness. Next slide. And again, these are just more timeframes that are the same as the prior slides. Next slide, please. I am going to go over some important registration renewal and expiration dates. So if an application was approved before the counselor's current expiration date, the renewal date will be 1 year from the current credential expiration date. If an application was submitted after the credential expired, the individual is no longer eligible to provide counseling services and is prohibited from providing counseling services until they are renewed. Likewise, if the application is approved after the individual's credential expiration date, the renewal date will be 1 year from the approval date. And lastly, registration credentials are valid for 1 year unless revoked or suspended by DHCS or a certifying organization. And next slide. Certifying organizations and counselors are required to comply with BHIN 25029 beginning January 1st, 2026. And individuals who register between July 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2025 are required to submit proof of the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics by July 1st of 2026. Individuals who register on or after January 1st, 2026, the 6-month window takes effect immediately, and these individuals are required to submit proof of the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics within 6 months of registering. And lastly, individuals who register before July 1st, 2025 and apply for initial certification on or after January 1st of 2026 will be required to submit proof of core competency education topics prior to initial certification, but do not need to meet the 80-hour requirement. And depending on the school, some counselors may already meet most core competency requirements. They may only need to take 1 or 2 additional courses, and an example could be electronic health records. Next slide. And here is a chart with some examples. So again, individuals who register before July 1st, 2025 and apply for initial certification on or after January 1st, 2026 are not subject to the 6-month time frame and are exempt from the 80-hour requirement. For example, if an individual registered on March 20th, 2025, and they are not yet certified before January 1st, 2026, they will be required to submit proof of completion of the core competency education topics to their certifying organization prior to initial certification. And again, depending on the school, some counselors may only need to do 1 or 2 additional topics. Individuals who register between July 1, 2025 and December 31st, 2025 are subject to the 6-month time frame effective January 1, 2026. For example, if a counselor registers on October 1st, 2025, the counselor is required to submit proof of 80 hours of education and core competency education topics by July 1st, 2026. And then the last example, if individuals register on or after January 1, 2026, they are immediately subject to the 6-month window. An example would be if a counselor registers on February 5th, 2026, the counselor is required to submit 80 hours of education, including proof of core competency education topics by August 5th, 2026. Next slide. Certifying organizations are required to approve education providers and courses in order to meet the 80 hours of education, including core competency education requirements and implementation dates. Certifying organizations must also ensure there are educational pathways and access to low barrier education that can be completed within 6 months. The certifying organizations will publish a list of approved education providers and courses that may be used to meet the 80 hours of education, including core competency education requirements by January 1, 2026. And Katie has shared that they will have educational courses at more than 40 colleges that meet these new education requirements, with options for fee waivers and transferability credit to other colleges. To aid in the implementation of these new education requirements and ensure there is access to low barrier education, the Department of Healthcare Services is sponsoring the Advancing SUD Counselor Education and Development Program, ACEN for short. This program is free, self-paced, asynchronous online course, which UCSD is here to present in the next few slides. However, I just want to provide a little background on what has been in the works. So in May 2024, DHCS created the AB 2473 Stakeholder Advisory Group, which is SAG. And this group is comprised of certifying organizations, individuals with substance use disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery experience to provide guidance, insight, and build out the ACEN program curriculum from stakeholders across the state. The ACEN program meets the 80-hour of education requirement, including core competency topics, if also approved and accepted by the counselor's chosen certifying organization. This program will be made available by the University of California, San Diego Division of Extended Studies in January 2026 and will be available through June 30th, 2028. This course is meant to fill the educational gap for providers to build out the AB 2473 education requirements into their curriculum. DHCS also provided a little over $4 million in grant funding to CADAPT and CCAP since 2023. A significant portion of this funding has been allocated to scholarships and financial assistance programs, which includes provisions for fee waivers and educational reimbursements. So within the Organizational Enhancement and Support Project, DHCS funded these two certifying organizations to grant SCD credential fee waivers for approximately 15,000 counselors and scholarships for approximately 3,000 counselors. BH Connect funds will be available to support the counselor training beginning in early 2026, as noted. And these funding initiatives directly aim to help implement AB 2473 education requirements and reduce financial barriers for individuals pursuing a SUD counselor career. And now I would like to pass it on to Laura, who will provide more details on the free online course. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Monique, and hi, everyone. UC San Diego Division of Extended Studies is very pleased to be partnering with DHCS to launch the Advancing SUD Counselor Education and Development Program, or the ASCEND program. The program will be launching on January 12th, 2026. And this is an 80-hour training program. It will be delivered in an asynchronous online format, and it will be free of charge, as Monique mentioned, free of charge to Californians. So because the program is intended for Californians, there will be an application process. The application portal at UCSD will open on December 1st, 2025, just so that we can verify California residency. The program consists of 12 courses, and each course is either 1 unit or half a unit long, and each of these courses corresponds to a core competency in AB 2473. We do expect that each course will take a student 1.5 to 3 weeks to complete, working at a very slow, steady cadence. But of course, students can take multiple courses at a time if they like, and they can also move as quickly as they like. These courses are essentially on-demand courses. Students will be able to enroll in a course at any time after they are admitted to the program. Next slide, please. We are very excited at the caliber of individuals who we've already recruited to teach within the program. All of our instructors have expertise in SUD counseling and real-world experience. The courses will all be delivered on UC San Diego Division of Extended Studies instance of the Learning Management System, Canvas. And each course will include video lectures, case studies, quick checks, interactive elements, and quizzes. There are several quizzes in each course. Our instructors will also be able and available to answer student questions via email, and our instructors will also be offering monthly office hours to support students. Finally, students will earn a digital badge upon completion of each course that they can showcase if they like on LinkedIn or on social. And they'll be awarded an award of completion once they complete the full 80-hour training program. Next slide, please. Finally, we're very interested in student feedback. This is a new program, so student feedback is critical to us to strengthen the program for our learners. We will be distributing evaluation forums to students at the conclusion of every course to gather feedback on both the instructional quality and the quality of our courses. And we do intend to make regular updates to the course content based on the feedback that we receive from our students and our instructors and our stakeholders. All of these courses are for credit. They're post-baccalaureate level, professional level courses. And we will be working with other educational providers to create pathways for transferability of the program into offerings at other institutions. And of course, as with all UC San Diego Division of Extended Studies courses, the transfer of credit is determined by the receiving institution. And so that's the formal summary of the program. And I would like now to pass it over to Stephen Lamb of DHCS for Q&A.
Thank you, Laura. We will now switch to the Q&A. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A box in your control panel. The first question that we have is, are the core competency education hours a part of the 315 education hours required for initial certification?
I want to take that one, Stephen. So yes, if a certifying organization, if they approve and accept the core competency education hours from a counselor, then those same core competency education hours, that'll count towards the 315 hours of education that's required for initial certification. And that is specified in Health and Safety Code 11833 as well. So you'll receive credit for that.
Thank you, Crystal. A second question we received is, when must counselors who register on or after July 1st, 2025 complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics?
Yes. So all first-year registered counselors who register between July 1, 2025 and December 31st, 2025 are required to complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics by July 1st of 2026. And then first-year registered counselors who register on or after January 1st of 2026, they are required to complete these requirements within the first 6 months of initial registration.
Thank you, Monique. Do counselors who register prior to July 1st, 2025 need to complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics?
So no, counselors who are in good standing and who registered before July 1st, 2025, those individuals are exempt from the requirement to obtain the 80 hours of education within 6 months of registration. But those individuals, they will need to complete the 315 hours of AOD education that is currently required by the certifying organizations, and that has always been required prior to the passage of AB 2473. The 315 hours of coursework must cover the same AOD education topics that are outlined in currently in California Code of Regulations, Title IX, Chapter 8, but then it will also now include the core competency education topics. So don't have to do the 80 hours, but they do have to do the core competency education topics prior to initial certification.
Can individuals complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics before applying for initial registration?
Yes, individuals may complete the educational requirements prior to applying for initial registration.
Thank you, Monique. Is there a certain time frame for how long the education completed is valid for?
So the 80 hours of education and core competency education coursework that's completed by an individual, that does not expire. And I did want to point out that that education can also be completed before applying for initial registration. So counselors would just submit proof of completing these new education standards when they're applying for a credential with their certifying organization.
Is there a certain time for, I apologize, is there a certain time frame for how long the education, oh, my apologies, I was rereading the same question. What is the difference between a first year registered counselor and a registered counselor?
So a first year registered counselor is an individual who has been registered to provide counseling services for less than 1 year. And then a registered counselor is an individual who has been registered to provide counseling services for 1 year or more and has renewed their registration at least once.
Our next question, what happens if a first year registered counselor fails to complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education topics within 6 months of registering?
Going back to the slides, first year registered counselors, they have to provide written documentation to their certifying organization that they completed the minimum of 80 hours of education, including core competency education within 6 months of registering. So that's really just like a check-in. And then if the certifying organization then determines that the first year registered counselor did not complete the required 80 hours of education, including core competency education topics within the 6 months of registration, that first year registered counselor, they still have the opportunity to complete the missing education before their registration expires. However, if that first year registered counselor fails to complete any of the required education before the expiration date of their credential, then they would no longer be eligible to provide counseling services until their credential is successfully renewed.
Thank you. Our next question is, who is exempt from AB 2473 education requirements?
1 second. So first year registered counselors that are registered prior to July 1st are exempt, July 1st of 2025, are exempt from the requirement to complete the 80 hours of education within the first 6 months of registration. And then registered counselors who have a master's degree in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, or counseling are exempt from completing the core competency education topics. But however, first year registered counselors with the degrees I just mentioned must still submit proof of the 80 hours of education prior to registration renewal. And individuals that are exempt from registration and certification requirements completely are also exempt from the AB 2473 education requirements. And again, Crystal covered these in her slides. Those individuals are graduate students affiliated with university programs in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, or counseling who are completing their supervised practicum hours to complete postgraduate requirements, associates registered with the Board of Behavioral Health Services, and the licensed professionals as defined by DHCS.
Thank you. Another question, are there hardship exceptions for the 80 hours of education and core competency education topic requirements?
No. So DHCS, we do not have the authority to grant hardship exceptions for the 80 hours of education and core competency education topic requirements. AB 2473 was amended so that way we can establish statewide minimum education standards to increase the training education of our AOD counselors. And this is really so that we can equip counselors with the necessary skills and knowledge to provide quality SUD counseling services. But we kind of worked with what we had, and the 6 months is essentially like a check-in, but really counselors, they may complete these education requirements for longer, essentially for more than that 6-month time frame. They really have until their credential expires to complete these requirements. So no hardship exceptions.
Thank you, Crystal. Another question. When do first-year registered counselors and registered counselors need to submit a registration renewal application?
Yes, so it's at least 120 calendar days before their existing registration expires, and that's for both.
Thank you, Monique. Which students is the Ascend curriculum intended for?
So the Ascend curriculum is for students who are seeking to provide substance use disorder counseling services within Department of Healthcare Services licensed and or certified substance use disorder treatment facilities. This curriculum is not intended for licensed clinicians, and it's not intended for administrative staff who are not involved in providing direct counseling services or medical professionals, or counselors outside of California or the general public. We could look at that in the future, but right now this course is really just intended for our individuals who are seeking registration or certification credentials from our certifying organizations.
Thank you, Crystal. When may counselors access the DHCS-sponsored curriculum that UCSD is creating, which consists of 80 hours of education that covers each of the core competency education topics?
Yes, so UCSD is aiming to open enrollment in December of 2025. The course will be available January of 2026, and it will be available through June 30th of 2028.
Thank you, Monique. Our next question, are individuals seeking to provide substance use disorder counseling services required to complete the Ascend curriculum in order to meet the requirements of AB 2473?
No. So counselors seeking registration renewal, they can complete education courses through any educational provider that's approved by their chosen certifying organizations. So no, they're not required to complete the Ascend curriculum. DHCS just decided to partner with UCSD to help implement AB 2473 requirements and to create a free pathway for folks to meet these new education standards. So the Ascend program curriculum is available for you all, but you just want to make sure that you check in with your certifying organization before completing the curriculum to make sure that they have approved and accepted the course so that way you receive credit from your chosen certifying organization. And as Monique touched on in her slides, CADAPT has confirmed that they do intend on accepting and approving the Ascend program. So you'll receive credit for it for CADAPT. And then CCAP is in review and hasn't determined quite yet. And then Katie is not going to currently accept the Ascend program. But as Monique mentioned, they have already been working diligently with their educational providers to develop courses that'll meet these requirements and that are feasible to meet these requirements within the 6-month timeframe that's outlined in law.
Thank you, Crystal. Another question, can the Ascend curriculum be used to satisfy continuing education units requirements for individuals who are already licensed or certified?
No, unfortunately not. The program will not count for CEUs, unfortunately.
Thank you. Our next question, can one core competency be included in the topics and lesson plans of other core competency education courses? For example, can confidentiality be included in the same course that covers law and ethics instead of being a standalone course?
Yes. So, some courses, they may cover more than one core competency education topic, but that'll be determined by the educational provider that is providing the course to you. However, the Ascend curriculum will provide each core competency education topic as a standalone course. So if you only need to complete, one core competency, for example, if you only need to complete utilization of health records, you can enroll into the Ascend program and only complete utilization of health records and then submit proof to your certifying organization that you completed that particular core competency. So you can take, whatever it is that you need. You don't have to do the whole program. And yes, at other educational programs, they may combine more than one core competency in a specific course.
Thank you, Crystal. Will reciprocity be granted by each certifying organization for completion of the Ascend curriculum?
Only certifying organizations that have approved the ASIM program will accept and grant reciprocity credit towards registration or certification education.
Thank you, Monique. Our next question is, are there any changes for certified counselors? It seems like everything is focused on registered counselors.
Yes, so a lot of the requirements are around registered counselors, and it was just to ensure that registered counselors do have, a base foundational knowledge and skills to provide quality SUD counseling services. As for certified counselors, those counselors may complete continuing education in the newly introduced core competency topics.
Thank you, Monique. Did I understand correctly that there is no longer a requirement for registered counselors to become certified within 5 years?
No, so the 5-year requirement, we're looking to remove it from the regulation package, but it's still effective until regulations are promulgated.
Yeah, so the 5-year requirement is still currently intact, or 7 years with an approved hardship. And we're looking to remove those time limitations so that way if individuals who want to enter or leave the SUD workforce, they're able to for various reasons, whether it's a career change, you want to be a stay-at-home parent, maybe you're joining the military, whatever reasons it may be, you don't have those time limitations. But those are still intact. And like Monique mentioned, we do have to go through the formal process to promulgate regulations. And that would be through Office of Administrative Laws process. So once we do officially open up that package, that does take at minimum a year to promulgate those regulations. So we do see that that's a barrier and we want to make those changes. Monique was just talking about, trying to justify why we put in annual requirements is because we're really trying to move that needle of individuals who, are registered for a long time, that we help to move them to meeting initial certification. since we did remove the 5-year requirement. Since we are looking to remove the 5-year requirement, sorry.
Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah.
Where can I find a curriculum that supports the new core competencies that DHCS recognizes or recommends?
So just as a reminder, the certifying organizations are responsible, and they're the ones that have the authority to approve education courses that meet their accredited programs requirements through the NCCA. So the certifying organizations, they will all publish a list of approved courses on their websites by January 1st, 2026. And then, as we mentioned before, and Laura presented on a few slides, that we are sponsoring that Ascend program that'll be made available through UCSD.
Does an applicant get their registration number essentially becoming employable before or after completing the 80 hours?
They get their registration number upon being approved by their certifying organization, and then they have to just complete the 80 hours of education and core competency education requirements within the first 6 months.
Thank you, Monique. Another question we received. Is there a timeline for certifying organizations to post acceptable education?
Yes. So it's outlined in the behavioral health information notice, and then we covered it in the slides as well, that certifying organizations will publish their approved courses to meet these new education standards by January 1st, 2026. And you can always call them too. If you don't see a course on there, you're not too sure, you can call or email them directly as well.
Thank you, Crystal. Another question we received is, are registered counselors expected to pay for their own classes?
Yes, so as mentioned, the ASIN program, that will be free. And then Katie, they had mentioned that they're going to have fee waivers to meet these education requirements. And then, however, without a fee waiver, counselors are expected to pay for their own courses.
Thank you, Monique. Another question is, did you mention that the annual training requirement is 50 hours?
So there, depending on where a counselor is at with their education, there are different requirements. So going back to Monique's slides, registered counselors who have fewer than 315 hours of AOD education, those are the individuals that have to complete 50 hours of AOD education to qualify for registration renewal. And then registered counselors who have already completed their 315 hours of AOD education, they have to submit 20 hours of continuing education to their certifying organization to qualify for registration renewal.
Thank you, Crystal. Is CADAP recognized by DHCS as a certified organization? I heard you speak for Katie and CCAP, but I didn't hear CADAP.
Yes, CADAP, Katie, and CCAP are all recognized by DHCS.
Thank you, Monique. And we have enough time for about one more question. Thank you, one just came in. Are certifying organizations being held to these timelines?
So certifying organizations must adhere to the timelines that were outlined on the slides and also outlined in the behavioral health information notice. There is a compliance section in the behavioral health information notice towards the end. So DHCS, we do have the authority to conduct periodic reviews of the certifying organizations to ensure compliance. And that is also compliance with the timelines that are specified in this guidance.
Thank you, Crystal.
Mhm.
And I'll go ahead and pass the rest on to Millie. Please change the slide.
Thank you, Stephen, for such an engaging Q&A session. And thank you to all of our panelists for answering all those questions. I'm sure it was really helpful. And to everyone who attended today's webinar, thank you so much. If you have any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to email DHCS at the email address shared in the chat. And listed here, we have resources as well. Thank you all and have a great rest of your afternoon.